Danny, we were hoping that the basketball gods would give us a Thibodeau, a forced Thibodeauing for the master himself, but he avoided his fate. He's the king. Dan wrote about it today that he was, as the most Thibodeaus in NBA history, losing a series with home court advantage in game five on your home court 4-1. But the Knicks managed to take it back to a game six in Indianapolis. How did they do it?
They did it in pretty impressive fashion. This was a 111-94 victory for the Knicks, a game the Pacers never led at all. And for me, there were a couple interesting places to start. One of them was the Pacers, especially in the more competitive portion of the game, really struggling from two. They were around 40% for a lot of the game. And overall, the Pacers converted just 17 of 37 shots in the paint. They were under 50% on shots in the paint. I thought the Knicks rim protection, so the pressure was good. And then also on the Knicks defensive front, they actually forced the Pacers, not Halliburton, but they forced the Pacers to turn the ball over. 20 turnovers, 20% of their possessions. And not all of those were live ball, but I thought getting the Pacers to turn the ball over was a pretty significant win too.
Oh, yeah, it definitely was. And just the overall pressure level from the Knicks was way higher, as we saw in game three as well. And this time they got to it right from the jump. Karl Anthony Towns was questionable. He played, he was excellent offensively, but they just came out with a different plan. A lot of the things that we talked about that I felt they should have been doing. And now it's not like Tyrese Halliburton hasn't beaten every single strategy in one way or another at some point. And the Cavs tried all this stuff, denying him the backcourt and forcing him left when he would just end up snaking it back to the right. But even that was going to make things more difficult for him. And also, I think there's something to be said for if you put some pressure on Halliburton, if you don't make it easy for him right away, he does have this weird tendency. We saw it again tonight to just kind of disappear
Hmm.
from the game. And he took 7 shots. He had 6 assists in the game. He didn't make a three, only took 2 threes. And so that started with Mikal Bridges pressuring up full court and then going to more of a defensive group when they really broke the game open almost entirely and never were particularly threatened again early in the second. That was when Halliburton started that on the bench, but he came back in during that second quarter run, 12-2 and under 3 minutes for New York with, again, their bench unit on the floor. So it's Bridges picking up full court. And part of the reason to do that, of course, is that then you can actually direct the ball. You're going to stay attached to his body. And they did two different things. If there was more of a regular pick and roll, they tried to keep him on the side. They tried to force him away from the screen, not let him get, because I mean, you remember Dan did a great video of it for subscribers and posted it as well, that they would just set these double screens. Halliburton would start on the left side of the floor. He would just saunter to the right side. He would just cross the 3-point line with a full head of steam. And he could he had every possible option available to him there: pull up for the three, drive for a layup with nobody around, throw it to the roll man, throw it to the pop man, throw it to the weak side. And you just limit the options more by keeping him on the side. And it's so interesting. Tom Thibodeau, of course, was one of the original proponents of that ice defense. Now,
Hmm.
I think the reason that they didn't necessarily want to pressure full court and the reason that they didn't want to get into the ball too much is they're worried about screens being set way up at half court and there being kind of a jailbreak. And Indiana now, like, that's part of the advantage of being up 3-1. Part of why I was so critical of the Warriors was that they didn't, like, Houston did a bunch of new stuff to them in game five in that series, and they just kind of wasted the reps against it. And then they were trying out the real stuff for the first time in game six. It's kind of an advantage in game five to be down 3-1. You desperately are looking for some new thing and you can try it, but the Pacers tried to play through that, and then they're going to have more stuff that they can counter with in game six, because they at least forced the Knicks to remain competitive throughout the entire game. But that worked great. And then the other thing that they did more of was if Jalen Brunson was involved, they didn't do this the entire game, but they did it a lot where he was just much more aggressive with his hedges. All of the Knicks just executed way better and played way
Yes.
harder as well. But they were putting two on the ball on Halliburton and then forcing Aaron Nesmith to be the roll man in a 4-on-3 situation, and they're able to largely tamp down what he was able to do, especially I would say because he's still not quite right with the ankle. I think that's been clear more from his shooting, maybe even than his defense.
I agree. And Neesmith, 1 for 5 on threes in game 5 and 0 for 3 on twos. And so, having him be the playmaker because Brunson is guarding him. So he's the guy who's who's to try to get Brunson into the action. And I also thought that one of the other kind of health of the Pacers offense things, Miles Turner only played 24 minutes, but he only took 3 shots in those 24 minutes. And there are different ways that you can generate looks for Turner, but he was pretty minor in terms of his offensive role. I didn't
Yeah,
think he was.
I mean, at some point you're like, well, who is even shooting for the Pacers
Yes, yeah, there is some of that. I
at
mean,
this point?
Indiana only had one starter attempt more than 8 shots, and that was Siakam, who was also pretty aggressive in some of the non-Halliburton minutes. And they need somebody to be, and he did some of that. But Nemhard only, he was 3 for 8 from the field. Neesmith was 1 for 8. And I thought one of the other big stories of game 5 was that the massive disparity, which we chronicled after game 4, of the Jalen Brunsons with Aaron Neesmith on and Aaron Neesmith off, that didn't hold in game 5. So when Neesmith was on the floor in game 5, it was a totally fine Jalen Brunson, 6 of 7 from the field, was able to get a few assists.
I mean, he not only totally fine, he just really attacked him. Like he looked
Yeah.
great early. He got off to a great start going against Neesmith and scored a couple of buckets and got a foul like directly on him right at the beginning.
Yeah, and so Brunson overall game 32 points, 12-18 from the field, 4 of 7 from 3. So he did it from 3, did it from 2, 5 assists, 3 turnovers, plus 18 in 34 minutes action. And so I thought Brunson looked really good, and he played well. And we'll probably talk about this in more substance a little bit later, but it's like I don't know like where the equilibrium is on this. It's certainly not all as far as it was in game 4 when it was Neesmith was shutting down everything that Brunson did. But I thought that the dominance at times that Brunson had on Thursday, that probably isn't the true line either. But it was very good, and it was integral to them winning the game as comfortably as they did.
Yeah, the Knicks just assaulted the basket, 37 shots at the rim within 5 feet, made 23 of those. And then they also were good from their floater range, 7 of 14. And then they shot the lights out for mid range too, 7 of 9. That made up for 8 of 29 3-point shooting, although it wasn't that bad for most of the game. And the Pacers actually shot relatively well through most of the game. Like after the first half, when they were down by 10 and they only scored 45 points in the first half, they were shooting fine from 3, but they weren't getting up many threes. And then they're 8 of 22 from 2 in the first half. And that's not Pacers basketball at all. And I thought the Knicks really like their level of physicality was just so much higher. Towns again was outstanding, getting to the basket with 24 points, only made 1 3 to get there. But they also, New York really withstood his foul trouble in the third quarter, which was huge, and ended up really leading by like the Pacers got it within 10 very briefly, and then New York immediately went on a run to push it back to 20 in the fourth. And that was pretty much it. And this one, yeah, you could never turn off a Pacers game, but they just looked totally out of it, totally done. Just they weren't like, I felt like as long as the Knicks continued to defend with even a tenth of the energy that they had shown, they were going to be fine, and ended up winning by 17.
Another way to quantify the Knicks' energy was that they fought the Pacers basically to a draw in terms of fast break points. And if you do it that way, or you use like the clean the glass version of it, like it was pretty close to a draw. And Indiana, that's usually a huge competitive advantage. I already brought up the Pacers turned the ball over more than the Knicks did, which is another challenge for them to potentially overcome. Not that they did in game 5. And so the Knicks played a lot better. And so I agree with you that like they did some important wrinkles in terms of making Tyrese Halliburton work. And we've seen Halliburton face these coverages before. I think that the Knicks, they have a high bar to execute it. If they execute as well as they did tonight, then they'll have a very good chance at game 6. I absolutely think they can win game 6. And but I don't know. I'll be interested if you have any thoughts on this in terms of like, other than, because they have familiarity with these concepts already, if there's anything in terms of personnel or scheming that you think the Pacers should really do differently, because we're so deep in a series. There were new things in this game, but there aren't that many stones that have never been unturned.
Yeah, well, Neesmith barely played. I think they felt like he just didn't have it from the
Hmm.
ankle perspective, and they really struggled in his minutes. Like we said, it was a polar opposite from game 4. There's some concern about Tony Bradley. He looked to have some sort of a hip or glute issue. I haven't seen what the story is there. He had to leave. And actually, Thomas Bryant came in and gave them, I thought, very good minutes, even though he did just get a dunk blocked. But so he matched up with Mitchell Robinson some. So that'll be something they have to think about. This was kind of a game 5 in the sense, oh, we'll give Jarris Walker a few minutes, and like he hit a couple of threes. I don't know that he's it in terms of his offensive decision making, but other than making wide open threes, I don't think there's much he does well. Like he's shown some passing and lower leverage situations, but I thought he blew a couple of assist chances tonight.
He also committed a terrible foul that basically set up a Knicks 2-for-1 at the end of the third with the
Yeah.
Knicks in the bonus. But he made 2 threes, which was good. And if Bradley, I think Bradley's been the better counter to Mitchell Robinson, who himself only played 20 minutes. And one of the other wrinkles we saw only briefly, as I recall it, in game 5 was Carlisle in the third did go to Haka, and it successfully got Mitchell Robinson off the floor.
Yeah,
But
which would have been his time to come out anyway. He had been
yeah,
in for 8
exactly.
minutes.
Yeah.
So hard to know. That might have just been the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of taking him out. But they did have to go to Precious Achua at center. Like Towns was in foul trouble. So I guess Thibodeau would have probably preferred to stay with Robinson. But Achua came in and gave him really good minutes as well. At one point, he had played 2 minutes and he was plus 10.
Yeah, and he ended up +6 in 6 minutes. And Achua, he can compete defensively. I've always really liked him on that end. I would love to see an Achua team. I guess it doesn't have to be the Knicks beyond this year. Use him as the anchor of a more switchy group, but the Knicks just don't like. They could theoretically go to that personnel, but it would take a lot of finagling. They haven't, they could to get all the guys. Like if you ideally you probably have Brunson off the floor. You could go to a different identity, but it's a lot to ask to do that, in the conference finals. So, and especially considering Achua really only played because Towns was in foul trouble, and then they went to Haka. I thought Achua did plenty well. We also, this was another game. We appreciate like what Landry Shamet brings to the table. Remember, Cameron Payne was in early in the series, and then Shamet has functionally replaced him in the rotation, especially aligning with Josh Hart taking the backup lead initiator units. And Shamet brings some movement shooting. I think he's much better defensively than Cameron Payne is, and so I thought he did well in his 14 minutes too.
Yeah, I agree. He's just provided a little bit more physicality and hit a couple of jumpers. One was a 3 with his toe on the line, also known as a 2.
TJ McConnell
But
disagrees.
yeah, so really, all of the Knicks guys off the bench played well. Even DeLon Wright was 0 for 4, missed a layup in transition, but had a nice steal. Again, all these guys going off the Knicks bench were adding energy. I thought Josh Hart really added the most of any of those.
Yeah.
His cutting in the second half was really good. There are a bunch of times when guys would drive, kind of get stuck baseline. Hart's cut would bail them out. He was 4-6 from 2, had 3 offensive rebounds, including one where he ran across the front of the rim, tipped it away, and you thought, oh, someone else is going to have to get this. Oh, no, it was just Josh Hart himself who was going to dive into the stands and then throw it off a Pacer to retain possession for the Knicks. Josh Hart is such a bellwether in this series to me because the Knicks look really good when his hustle stands out because he's the Knick who matches the energy of Indiana. Mikal Bridges is sort of like, a silky smooth sort of guy. Brunson and Towns, their scorers. Robinson can fall into that category too, but he doesn't have as much versatility as Hart. And Anunoby is another guy who he'll make like some energy plays for sure, but it's not the same type of level as Josh Hart. And really, I mean, here's the other thing though, Danny. Like, did any Pacer play well? Like Mathurin played well offensively, I guess.
Yeah, I mean the Pacers continued like, but the Knicks can't stop fouling Benedict Mathurin, so that I think went reasonably well. But yeah, it wasn't a
Yeah.
great Obi Toppin performance. It wasn't, as I said, Miles Turner was like invisible for portions of the game. Neesmith was definitely, yeah. I don't think any
Yeah.
Pacers
Turner got in foul trouble in the first half,
right.
finished with 3 fouls, but nonetheless, yeah, the Pacers got hit with some legal screens. And the other thing too is like the Knicks just fucking set screens. Like Karl
Yes.
Anthony Towns like laid the wood on Aaron Neesmith, and Brunson was able to get going downhill. You had that play where Brunson actually accelerated in transition, probably pushed off illegal with the off arm, but he's able to do that because he can accelerate and transfers momentum. Sent Neesmith sprawling backwards and then ended up getting an and one. There's another play where they set a screen and Neesmith kind of got knocked down, was trying to get back to his feet, and then he ran into Brunson from behind. Like, it wasn't the same impact from Neesmith, and particularly, 1 of 5 from 3. He just doesn't seem to have his feet underneath him on some of those threes the way he did before the ankle sprain. But I think you never know between the Pacers in particular, but then the Pacers and the Knicks are just two teams with very inconsistent players, and then their relation to each other is also totally inconsistent, where they're just these things that you don't understand. Aaron Neesmith totally shuts down Jalen Brunson, and then Brunson just goes off, and Neesmith statistically is the worst defender on Brunson tonight. And Karl Anthony Towns becomes this really good switch guy for a game, and then he's just totally miserable again. And Mitchell Robinson, great switch defender, and then he's just miscommunicating on everything and letting Halliburton just shoot over him whenever he wants. And Mikal Bridges, another feast or famine guy offensively, when he's got his little mid-ranger going. He was 6 of 9 from 2 today. And so and Halliburton, we've talked about how he is just will wax and wane from these single-digit scoring games to having one of the best offensive games in NBA playoff history. And Siakam is like a little bit more of a dependent player. Like, they're not really built to give him the ball. Turner can get in foul trouble. So many guys on these teams can get in foul trouble, which is also a big variable.
Yes.
Like, I do think the most consistent thing in the series, although it wasn't there tonight, is just the Pacers' pace and relentlessness. And I don't think that New York is going to be able to quell that for 2 more games. So I still think it's advantage Pacers, but trying to predict what's going to happen in an individual game in this series can be quite difficult.
It can be. And that's why it's fortunate for the Pacers that they have 3 bites of this apple. And it might take them all 3 bites to do it, because I could easily, as I said, I could see the Knicks winning game 6. I would favor the Pacers, but I could see the Knicks winning it. And the other curiosity with Neesmith is that having a great game 4 and having a poor game 5 defensively, like, that could have made more sense, like, depending on the ankle. But he sprained his ankle in game 3. It wasn't like it occurred during game, and so it didn't seem like he had it. So it's something we'll have to monitor in game 6 on Saturday. Is just, how is he feeling? How is he looking? Because they still really only have one guy who could defend Jalen Brunson. And if that guy is limited, and the Knicks did a fantastic job of also making Neesmith less likely to succeed, that totally changes the viability of the Knicks offense.
No, I agree. And even while the Knicks were running pretty well, granted they didn't make threes, so it's harder to get assists that way. So this is actually one of their better assist games of the series, with 22 assists on 44 field. And I think another bellwether for the Knicks is whether guys like Bridges, is 5 assists a career high for Nickeil. Should we do a little to the basketball reference bat signal here of what Mikal Bridges' career high is in assists?
I'm guessing it's at least 8.
All right, I'm going to say it's 7. 5 might be. Well, I guess he had that period though when Brunson was out, so maybe he passed.
Oh, are we saying his Knicks high or his career high?
No, I was talking about 2 different things. I was talking about his career high, but then also his.
So here's what's interesting: they're both the same.
Okay,
it's 9, and he's done 9 a number of different times, but he included on the Knicks.
All right, what's his career high in free throw attempts? 3.
18 on the Nets.
Was that in that like crazy Nets Hawks game from
No,
last year? Like
it
it was
was
like
in
a double overtime.
it was in a Nets Magic regulation game, early
Wow,
season last year.
man. Lot of shit happens in the, in the regular season.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, in terms of adjustments, Indiana's got to deal with the Brunson hedging. I think they'll be more ready for that as well. I think part of what would help there is setting those screens further down on the floor so that then if they're going to hedge or double, Neesmith can just pop right for a three immediately rather than him having to slip to the basket and make a play, which I'm not sure he can do. But that's going to be a problem. Like if he said his ankles bother him, he's not 100%, but he was able to get through it in game 4. Didn't come out with the right mindset today, he said. Also, just generally when they're more aggressive, slipping out earlier can really help. I think again, getting that screen, maybe go away from the double screens and back to more single screening actions. You could even bring Halliburton off the ball a little bit more as well instead of screen with Brunson's man, like try to get him on the move, turning downhill that way because it's much harder to direct the ball in those situations. I think more of Nembhard on the ball, I think could be useful as well.
Mm-hmm.
Although he doesn't have the greatest matchup in the world, but he's someone who in some ways can just go at Brunson more, or you have Nembhard go at Brunson, and then you can swing the ball to Halliburton. Like they're denying Halliburton, doing all this stuff, and like the Pacers just didn't meet any of that with force, with energy, with just like trying harder. So it's not all strategic. A lot of it is just like not giving up,
Mm-hmm.
which usually the Pacers are pretty amazing at that, but they just didn't bring that same mentality tonight. And yeah, I mean, we talked about the rotation stuff already. Bridges didn't really play much in the second quarter. He was better in the second half. So yeah, I do think that continuing to vary up the looks and the defenders and maybe even the coverages on Halliburton based on what they're doing right. If you want to put right on Halliburton, like I might try to jigger the rotation. So like Wright though can't play with Brunson. He's got to really play like in the non-Brunson minutes with Towns, and Halliburton doesn't play many of those. But I'd try to get some minutes on Halliburton, and then maybe in those circumstances you don't have to direct the ball. Maybe then you can actually have Wright get over the screen. If it's Bridges, you try to keep him on the side more because Bridges can't really get over a screen the same way. So they're definitely like that tete-a-tete is gonna. I was just surprised by how little counter the Pacers had to that, and Halliburton in particular had to that. Ready to talk a little Minnesota Timberwolves offseason, Danny?
Yeah, let's do it. And we've actually discussed some of the contours of Minnesota's offseason in the context of the free agent rankings because we ended up having an extended discussion about Julius Randle and Naz Reid. And the Timberwolves are in a fascinating situation. I'll let you take the lead on explaining because really the main dynamic that's in play, if retention is the strategy, which it doesn't have to be, we'll get into some other stuff, is the second apron. Because I don't know that it is a hard line considering they've made 2 straight conference finals, but it's probably pretty close to one with the new ownership formally taking over. And remember that there was the awkward dynamic where Glenn Taylor was running the team, making decisions as the ownership fight was happening. But it became at least some pretty likely to us that he wasn't going to be footing that bill because eventually Laurie and Rodriguez took over.
Yeah, so here's where they are. Randall player option for 31 million. Reid player option for 15 million. Alexander-Walker, nothing on the books for next year, but they do have full bird rights on him to pay him whatever they want. So, I mean, they could just pay all these guys anything, but you do have the tax and apron restrictions, and they also have to worry about the repeater tax sum as well. I mean, I don't see how this group is going to get out of the tax at all, but it will be kind of fascinating. Like this is, I would imagine from a PR standpoint, they've been wanting to get their hands on things for a while. They just made an absolute killing in terms of it, even just selling part of the team out to third parties by just arbitrage on the valuation that they were getting the team for back at
Right.
2021 prices. So they should just have a lot of money to burn, and they're never going to have a better team than this to work with, and they're trying to get a new arena built. So I think all those things would indicate to me that they're willing to at least go up to the second. So right now, they don't have any obvious guys that they could dump in terms of guys who are important. Maybe that's Mike Conley. At some point, he's expiring at 10.8. I don't think I would want to just turn the keys over to Rob Dillingham next year. At some point, they plan to do that. So here's how much they have, assuming they fill out a roster with 14 players. They have $50 million below the second apron to bring back Randle, Alexander-Walker, and Naz Reid. Not really enough. Even if you had Randle opt into 30, Reid opt into 15, then you only got $5 million left for Alexander-Walker. Now you could go into the second apron to start with, but there isn't your obvious Kyra Lewis type of candidate here to just dump to get under at the deadline. That could be Conley if Dillingham was ready. There might even be a team that would just take Conley into their mid-level trade exception. But it also, we saw Mike have a rough start to the year. He's going to be 38 next year. But I still think that they kind of need him. They could just get by without him. Maybe and Alexander-Walker to me is kind of more important in the future. But he's somewhat duplicative of DiVincenzo. Although I think Alexander-Walker is a way better on-ball defender. And I do think they need that other guy to guard the ball. I think going up against teams like the Lakers or Golden State, or obviously, Alexander-Walker is a decent counter for his cousin on OKC, and just you can't just be all Jaden McDaniels. And I don't think Terrence Shannon, he's kind of like a little narrow shoulder, not that strong. He's like more of like a straight line energy guy than like a great lateral mover from what I've seen so far. He's also like only 2 years younger than Alexander-Walker, hilariously. He's almost 25. So to me, Alexander-Walker is still really important to what, like all three of those guys are really important to what they do. Now we sort of did the post-mortem on them, and it's like, Randle is really good. He's their second best offensive player, but he really struggled against OKC. And Naz Reid was like, had 3 terrible games against OKC. But like those guys are also just incredibly important to the theory of the team. Like, could you just lose Naz Reid and just say, we're going to just play Jaden McDaniels at the 4-way more? He'll just be our backup 4. And we'll then bring back Alexander-Walker, and he or Ant will just play some 3, or we could work Shannon in there more. Maybe that would be part of it, but you also would lose a lot of the shooting and a lot of the explosiveness that's required. So let me ask you this. Do you think there's any way they could bring back all 3 of those guys? Alexander-Walker, Randle, and Reid.
For $50 million, it's really tough because you have player options that are pretty close to that valuation. And I mean, I would guess that that if you were talking to Randle and Reid and the representation, the hope would be that they could potentially get more than that. Reid won 6 Man of the Year in the 23-24 season. Randle has definitely had his successes, even if you and I weren't the biggest fan of his All-NBA candidacies, his selections when that happened. So, and I mean, you and the way that you could counter that is there's really only one team with cap space. We don't know if Brooklyn would be super interested in being in the Randle business or the Reid business or the Alexander-Walker business, just in terms of where they are in the success cycle. And Detroit, like, they're kind of a boogeyman that they don't even necessarily have space, depending on how they want to handle all their own business. So there isn't a lot of external leverage, but there is the idea of just how much are these players worth. And, one of the, like, if one of the ways that this could work theoretically is you get close is if Randle and Reid opt in, and then you build something, either an extension or even you roll the dice after that. But then that only leaves $5 million for Alexander-Walker. But so I'll say, I don't think you could do it for 50, but I do think that you could do it for little enough over 50 that you could potentially solve it eventually. And I'm an advocate at times for the pay the players the money, and you could sort out a small amount of money. I mean, we've seen various teams do this over the period of time. So I think that path is viable, but 50 is pretty tight.
Yeah, Randall's situation, and maybe Reed's as well, but Randall's in particular has changed since we last discussed it. When we were last talking about it, he was destroying the first two rounds of the West playoffs, and he still is an incredibly valuable player. Like, they don't have another passer like him. They don't have another mismatch attack like him. They don't have another guy who can generate threes off the pass the way he does. So he still is a valuable player. And also, this is a group that may want to make a move at some future time as maybe some more. They've got this Detroit pick as well. They have the 31st pick in this draft too, I believe. And their 2032 pick will be, they were in the second apron this year, right? So their 2032 pick will be frozen. They won't be able to trade that.
And that pick wouldn't have been traded anyway because of the Stepien rule, because they owe their
they could have swapped it, but and they owe everything. I mean, that you could re-swap some swaps possibly, and they've got a bunch of protections on their various picks going forward. But they don't have any picks they can trade other than that Detroit first,
which is 17th overall. Just to
right, yeah. Which actually, that's a nice little candy cane to get on that Randle trade. So to me, so much depends on Randle. Like, who knows what Randle's market is? And I just don't know how he's thinking, how other teams are thinking about Julius Randle. Like, certainly the way that he played in these playoffs, $31 million is a bargain. He's 30, but like, could you get him to opt out and come back for a salary that started at 25 and then had the maximum raise? Like, they could give him a 5-year contract.
That's true.
Like, I don't know what they should, but it's but that's kind of a part of this question too, is where are you right now? And this has been something with this team going back to the Gobert trade initially, and why I was critical of the Gobert trade. I think ultimately I probably was wrong, given that they've made back-to-back conference finals, and even that in and of itself is worth it. But it was like, how much are you going to put into right now around Anthony Edwards, or how much are you going to maximize his prime, which he still is not in? He hasn't even turned 24 yet. And so you could try this strategy, whatever it is, of trying to keep Reed and Randall's salaries as low as possible. Alexander-Walker's a little different. He hasn't made any money in his career yet. But, you could say, I mean, Reed not going to take less than his player option amount, but maybe you could get him to opt in for the player option amount. To me, Reed is, kind of a high teen sort of player. We'll see whether the league agrees on that, but I don't think he's a starter. So it's tough to get over 20 million. You're not a starter, but he's as high end as a backup can be.
Yes.
And, but just the fact that he's not really, that he can't play center does make things a lot more difficult. But the fact that he's like a big plus offensively at power forward is huge. And he can close some games, but he can't all the time. We definitely saw his defensive limitations in this OKC series, particularly when he's also playing next to another power forward.
Right.
But so you could say, hey, Julius Randle, we're going to offer you a 5-year deal. And this is an extreme version of this. Start you at 25 million. We're going to give you the max 8% raises. Naz Reid, if you just opt into that 15 million, we're going to give you this Aaron Gordon style extension where we're going to like really bump you up over 20 million for the next 4 years after that, in exchange for you helping us stay out of the second apron this year. And we'll just kind of hope that the rising cap kind of takes care of things a little bit more. Conley would be off the books. McDaniel's contract would continue to be more of a value. And so that's also, by the way, remember that they kind of dealt with this already with Gobert, where they had him opt out of his player option and sign a 3-year extension for over 100 million with a player option that they'll probably end up doing that with again. So all those things, like, maybe they could figure it out. Like, I'm Randle and Alexander-Walker, I'm just not sure exactly what their markets will be. Alexander-Walker feels mid-level. I actually think he's worth more than that personally.
I do too.
But it's just, again, how are you exactly you're going to get paid that? And all the other thing too is that generally getting good players on good contracts is not going to come back to bite you. And so these guys would possibly be tradable. Now, tradable to save money. The whole, a third of the league, I think, is going to start next season in the tax something like that, or close to it.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's trying to cut money, but there are plenty of teams that would take it, and maybe there are teams that are just trying to get better and would just take some of these guys, whatever. Because letting Alexander-Walker leave for nothing, I agree with you. I'd rather just pay him what it takes. He's a good player. I don't think it's going to be so much where it's going to like break the bank, and then you can move him later. Or maybe you decide DiVincenzo is the guy to move instead. He would have value. Or maybe you just think Rob Dillingham's just he's not it. I don't think that would happen, but we'll move him or Conley or something. Like these are all good players who have value. So just letting them go for nothing because you're going to be $4 million in the second apron does seem short-sighted.
I also would be concerned, probably more for Reid than anyone, about the idea of getting a slight discount for 25, 26 and adding extra years on the back end. It's funny that it happens with the same person, but Reid and Bobby Portis, where Portis integral part of, or integral.
Yeah, Reid is
much
so
love.
much better than Bobby
I agree.
Portis, in my opinion.
I agree, but the idea of like an offense first power forward, and so going too many years, years not dollars, is a concern, because Minnesota, even if there is the rising cap, like what table are you setting for the future? And and because the longer you go out, and this is an extreme of it, but like Zeke Naji, if you want to think about it, it becomes harder to trade. Like you become a team that is more set, even if you're happy with the way things are. If you have to pivot in 27, then it's a lot harder to do. Now, if you could get good players for this time, maybe that's just worth it. And it's going to be, I think this is going to be a really weird off season for people like us when it comes to Minnesota, because I would love to know the permutations that aren't accepted in these negotiations, because we're going to end up, and it's going to be one contract. And I think especially with Randle Reid, it's going to be with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And we're like, well, what else were they open to? What else were they not open to? And we're just not going to know. And that's unfortunate, but the way this thing works.
Yeah. Now you could also possibly just try to get a little something for Reid in a sign and trade. And maybe there now Alexander-Walker, it's more difficult with a sign and trade for him because he'll have base year issues, only making $4 million, to bring back something and match the salary. And with the Wolves being they probably are in a situation where they don't want to get hard capped at the second apron, and where if they could end up bringing out, doing an aggregation, and then they would be hard capped there, or they can't send out less money than they're taking back in a trade. Yeah, maybe they could figure it out with a third team. Let's talk about some possibility of trade candidates. They have been linked to Kevin Durant. Durant supposedly is interested in his playing with his protege in Minnesota. Question number one: do you think they would have the goods to get a deal done if KD decided that's where he wanted to be, which he has some decent control over with only 1 year left on his deal?
Potentially. It's always tricky to think about what Matt Ishbia and the Suns want, but it seems
I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I think they have a decent, just in general, they're going to want players. They're not going to want draft picks, or they're going to want draft picks they can trade for players.
Yeah, and that's really good news for the Timberwolves, because the Timberwolves don't have picks and they do have players. And so getting to the matching salary, because one of the tricky things about a Durant negotiation with these two teams, it was impossible to do functionally in season because both teams were in the second apron, and there's just only so much you can do. If the Wolves function as under the second apron, they could aggregate, they could do a couple different tricks, but that means they can't add too much salary because they would be hard capped second apron, can't go over. Durant makes $54.7 million next season, and Minnesota doesn't have a painless path to get there. Their largest salaries are important players, so they could, they presumably either Gobert, and he's older and all that, and McDaniels one of them has to be in the deal.
Well, or it could be Randle.
Yeah, but
right?
Randle would involve his active involvement. He would have to. He would be.
Well, I mean, the Suns are willing to pay people. He probably.
That's true.
Like I think even if he opted in, I think the Suns could give him a 3-year extension within the extended trade rules that he would be willing to accept. I don't think that would be too much of a problem. And like the Suns are, would want that's sort of like a lesser version of that Jimmy Butler trade that they were in theory willing to do. And also the Suns have or the Wolves have other pieces that are rotational guys like the Tim Connolly and Chris Finch. They noted that you have guys like Shannon or Dillingham who are cheap and also they want to get a look at in the rotation. That just they have 8 awesome guys, so they just didn't get those guys in this year. And so I actually think there is kind of a deal to be made there within the Suns' delusional dreams of competing, and also considering that this is a place that KD would want to go. And I like this as much as say Houston's been talked about as a KD destination. Number one, I think Houston just has much more optionality. I don't think they want to pay KD's next contract. And number two, Minnesota might have better win now. Like they don't have a regular season player, the quality of Julius Randle that they can necessarily send back to the Suns. Like Houston wouldn't include Şengün in that. And, let's say it's Miami. Miami could send a few more draft picks back, or maybe Andrew Wiggins is part of it. But again, like Randle is a very good fit, I would say, for what Phoenix in theory is looking for. Not that they should be looking for that. They should just trade Devin Booker and totally tear down, but they're not going to do that.
For a team that makes the first round, it doesn't make it out of the second. Yeah, great fit.
Or doesn't make it out of the first round. I mean, we'll see. The West is going to be just such a monster again next year.
So question for you. If you were in Tim Connolly's shoes and the Suns said McDaniels has to be in the deal, would you be willing to do it?
No, I don't think so, because it's just impossible to replace him, and he's on a great contract. I mean, McDaniels is probably going to give you more production over the next 5 years than KD, and he's going to make a lot less. So I don't think you need to have someone to play next to KD. And I think that would be really important. Now, I mean, another thing is they could consider trading Gobert as well and just try to figure out center. That would be another possibility. I mean, that could even be a way to retain all these guys and maybe find a way to get cheaper and possibly even get an asset for Gobert. I don't know what people are thinking his value is around the league right now. Like, would the Lakers be interested in Rudy Gobert after he put up 37 points and 39 rebounds against them in that game 5? So that's an interesting question. But I do think the bigger thing to me for the Wolves with KD is just, how do you feel about paying him the next deal? Like, maybe he would take a little less on a 2-year extension than the max, and maybe between him, Edwards, McDaniels, Gobert, I mean, that is very, very expensive as well. But you're going to be very expensive regardless. And they have all this, like, they could stand to be a little bit more top heavy than they are, frankly. But like, it's kind of like, hey, you're already all in anyway. Like, I don't know how they're planning on competing 4 or 5 years from now with no draft picks and the rest of these guys getting old at that point anyway.
Just so we have it, Durant will be eligible to sign an extension that would add 2 years and up to $123.8 million. That is the maximum allowable extension that he could sign.
Yeah, but he can sign that after the trade, though, which is nice. There wouldn't be a trade restriction on that. So that's fascinating. And then I think we're probably getting close to wrapping up here, because it doesn't feel like a big trade is in the offing if it's not going to be adding another all-star. Like, they're not going to trade. I mean, I think they should hold on to Julius Randle unless, like, you could just let him go. But I don't think, I don't know where he would go. Like, is there a team that would, give up a lot of draft equity for him, and you would just be happy to have that? And, we'll just do the same thing again, where we send some talent out the door, and, we'll play McDaniels more at the 4, and Reid will start at the 4 now?
To me, the way that you would get real draft equity for Julius Randle would be a team that doesn't have the flexibility to sign him outright, but has,
of course,
truly negative salary. And I don't really know who that is who simultaneously wants and needs. I mean, I just because of the type of player he is, I'm like, oh, what about the Bulls? But I mean, Patrick Williams and some of the other stuff. But the Bulls also, I don't think they would give up picks, like to give up a bunch of picks for that purpose.
Yeah, I don't know that they would necessarily, and because if you're going to trade Randall, it doesn't make sense for the Wolves to just get back three $10 million contracts. Like those guys are going to just be worse than the guys they already have. They already have great role players here, and there isn't really a certain type of guy that they're missing on this team. Now you put all these together and you do have some more offense focused lineups, some more defense focused lineups, but in terms of just, hey, we're missing player type X, that's part of the brilliance of this Wolves roster, and particularly why they should always be competitive in the regular season, because they're just going to have like a lot of good players and depth, and they'll compete on a nightly basis, and they're young. So yeah, I think you probably, like, I don't think the option of just shedding Randall's salary entirely as a way to just reset the books is really there. Like, because I mean, maybe that would happen after this year, but then why not just keep him on the opt-in? Like, the other thing too is maybe you don't come to an agreement. He opts in, and you just play it into the season. You can always give him the extension off of that in the season too.
I think that could be a really potent strategy for the Wolves, because
it's just crazy to think that Randall is not going to have that much of a market. But we've always said, like, he doesn't fit that many places, and also nobody has cap space this offseason. Nobody, like, teams certainly could have been like, oh, we're going to line up to get Julius Randle this offseason. Nobody did that.
Nobody did. And there is also the possibility at this point that teams will have it in 26, and whether anyone's going to really roll those dice, we'll have to see, because there are a couple of significant possibilities. I think Randall's the most significant of those, unless we're going to count Kyrie, but that's a whole different situation. So maybe he just sees it, and so, teams are, and again, I think we'll see that space start to thin out too, just with the massive rise of veteran extensions. But it's just such a fascinating dynamic, because I don't think there's a lot of disagreement in terms of what he is as a player, but there's a lot of disagreement about how valuable that is, and how much of a priority that should be for teams. And so usually my rule is it only takes one or two, but in this cap environment, that's not necessarily true.
If they got Kevin Durant for an opted in Julius Randle and DiVincenzo, and they probably got to give up the Detroit first. Maybe they just like Horcrux out another swap to get in. Like, any swap with Phoenix actually is like pretty valuable to Phoenix at this point, just because Phoenix they have so many of their swaps just swapped with 8 different teams. It's like guaranteed to be way at the bottom of the round. So if you can actually just possibly swap the Wolves, that's actually could be valuable. Even if it's like a Horcrux swap of a Horcrux swap, like we could end up with that.
Is the question going to be if basically the only key rotation player that goes out is Randall? Are, like, to me, they're still
and DiVincenzo probably. Like, I think they would be, or maybe it could be Dillingham, it could be kind of like they got to get up to $50 million in salary,
right? So to me, if you do KD for Randall, let's say Randall and DiVincenzo, I don't think they're a better team than the Thunder, but they could make it a much tougher series. And if, especially if the Thunder have a health issue or something else, like they could win the West next year with that group, but they'd have to be healthy. And that's always a question mark, because you need all of their guys. You need KD, you need Ant, you need Gobert, and you need McDaniels. I think you need all 4 of those guys to be healthy, to be viable.
I mean, think of like what a fucking massive team that is, though.
It's be pretty damn fun.
But you also have a ton of shooting, and then you throw in Conley or DiVincenzo, or you could get away with playing Dillingham more, and they still would have enough depth as well. I mean, I would like DiVincenzo as a fit with that group. If you could give up somebody else, I would try to do that. I mean, but I think like DiVincenzo would have to be in the deal just for the value of it, right? And maybe Dillingham has to be in it too, just so Cleveland feels like, or sorry, Phoenix feels like they're getting something back. But it's like so many variables there. If that's where KD wants to go and he can scare off the rest of the market, I could easily see the Wolves having the best package, and I could still see Phoenix being like, yeah, you know what? Actually, like we're probably better if we make this deal because we don't have enough good players. And so I think that's, and maybe there would be even more of a swap of some role guys as well in there. But I'm that would be pretty fascinating, and I think I would do that as Minnesota. I think I would do it. I'm not like, you're never gonna be in a situation with like someone like KD wanting to go there, even at his age. Gobert is also pretty old already. It's not like they have some great future 4 years from now.
Yeah, I
Like a
mean,
lot of their guys are going to have aged out. They don't have any draft picks to fill in around them. They've already sort of made their deal of getting Dillingham as like their one young bet along with Shannon.
well, Nate, it's very similar to the deal that ended up happening because the KD deal didn't, where you had the Warriors line up their guys. The difference is that Anthony Edwards is a whole lot younger than Stephen Curry is, but you'd probably line up Gobert and Kevin Durant. Because if KD gets a 2-year extension, and then you're like, well, after that, who the hell knows? But we'll have this another 2 to 3 years, depending on how well those guys age and how healthy they stay, and you could do a lot worse.
You agree with me that you would have to make it imperative to keep McDaniels out of the deal?
It would take one hell of an alternate deal for me to put him in. So I'm not going to say,
Yeah.
like, but it would take. But so it's such a high bar that functionally I think we're in the same place.
All right. Yeah. Fascinating off season. Any other interesting stuff? Just housekeeping. Let's
Um,
see. They got a
yeah.
team
So
option on Josh Minott,
yeah, they
Luca
have team
Garza.
option. They have team options on Minot and Luca Garza. They have, so interestingly, I don't think these are going to be relevant, but the Wolves do have 2 trade exceptions from deals they did last year that they are not allowed to use if they are over the second apron, but they theoretically would be to go under. So they have an 8.7 million trade exception from the Kyle Anderson trade and the sign and trade with the Warriors, and then about a little bit over 4.5 million one from the Towns trade. So theoretically, that could be a mechanism if, let's say, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker goes elsewhere, to add in a player who could help that, because that's a mechanism that might work for you better than something else that could trigger a different hard cap.
Yeah, or they might they maybe have the tax MLE available. But there isn't really any free agent I would rather sign at this point, rather than just let's see what Shannon and Dillingham can do, and even Josh Minott for that matter. Like he's got the team option, so does Garza. I think you probably just opt those guys in. They're good depth pieces and they're really cheap. They're both extension eligible. In the case of Minott, I might be willing to kind of do a try for like a Miles McBride-esque extension with him, see if you could lock him up as a rotation. Like if you could just develop him into a backup power forward, and then you could trade Reid and get a lot cheaper that way at some point in the future. That's something that you could consider. Or maybe, if Randall did leave, maybe you just promote him to backup power forward, see what happens. But I think they can't take the creation step back that losing Julius Randle would mean. You have to have a second creator. So unless you're trading him for something that's really awesome, like there's no way your offense can be good enough if you don't have him or a suitable replacement.
Well, especially because this Minnesota, they have a lot of good players, but they don't have enough wings to just like slot McDaniels in there. First of all, you'd lose a ton offensively, and just like, oh, we'll make that work. If they could get somebody like that in a theoretical trade, maybe, but you'd, as you said, lose a lot of offense.
All right, let's pack it in here. Minnesota Timberwolves, yet another fascinating team. What's going to be a fascinating off season. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you all next time. Until then.